Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today on the podcast, we welcome back our regular guest host, music journalist Jon Burlingame. He's in conversation with Michael Abels, who is the Pulitzer Prize-winning and Emmy and Grammy-nominated composer of the latest series in the ever-expanding Star Wars universe, The Acolyte. If you haven't seen it yet, all episodes in Season 1 are now streaming on Disney Plus in stunning Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos, which really showcases the show's score. And its achievement made all the more impressive when you consider Michael has been passed the baton from legendary Star Wars composer John Williams. But I'll let Jon Burlingame take over the introduction from here.
It's a thrill to be able to talk with today's guest. You already know his music for such Jordan Peele films as Get Out, Us, and Nope. He is a two-time Emmy nominee and a winner of the prestigious Pulitzer Prize in Music for his opera Omar, co-written with Rhiannon Giddens. He's here to discuss his score for the new Star Wars series on Disney Plus, The Acolyte. Welcome, Michael Abels.
Pleasure to be with you, John.
So Michael, how did you become a part of the Star Wars universe?
I was contacted by Leslye Headland, the showrunner of The Acolyte, and she is a huge fan of Jordan Peele and had liked the scores of mine she heard, and so she asked me if I would be interested, and I was like, absolutely.
So, of course, there's a long and sort of storied history to Star Wars music, and particularly that of John Williams. Were you a fan of either the movies or the scores?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially of John Williams and his art, but I'm one of those people who saw the original trilogy in the theater. So I've grown up with Star Wars and with the music of John Williams, and so yeah, I'm not I haven't read the books, and I've seen a couple of the other series, but not all the others. So I'm not as hardcore a fan as some people, but when it comes to the music, I'm absolutely a fan.
So this is a Star Wars series, and I'm wondering, does a Star Wars series necessarily have to follow the John Williams style of music?
Well, no, it doesn't. It kind of goes to the nature of what makes Star Wars Star Wars. And I think a lot of people I think every fan actually has an assessment of what makes Star Wars Star Wars. I had never put mine into words, but then I had to think about it. And so Leslye and I talked about that, about what makes it in this world and what makes it a new story, and how can we honor both of those challenges. And so one of the ways we quickly aligned on was that the music of Star Wars, while it's not necessary that it be old school or traditional or orchestral, that's something that we both valued. And so it was our intention to have the score be very traditional in places where it called for that and where that would work. And at the same time, there are definite ways in which this series explores new ground. It's all new characters. There's a method to the storytelling that's distinctly Leslie's own. And so in those places, the score does what it needs to do to bring this new element to the story. And I hope that I've achieved that balance, because that was kind of the key the key prescription of every scene is like, how traditional is this and how untraditional is this?
So we do have a traditional classical ensemble here. This is a symphonic score.
Yeah, there's a lot of other virtual sound that's not an orchestra, but is designed to sound like an authentic live sound, not electronic sounds. Let's say there are no electronic sounding things in the score, but there are some virtual instruments. However, on top of that is a giant live orchestra, which we recorded all entirely live.
Which is great. I'm so, and also what's fascinating to me is that The Acolyte is like a prequel to the Star Wars movies. This is sort of the beginning of a lot of what will then transpire over the 9 pictures, right?
Exactly. This takes place at least a century before any of even the prequels. And so there's been a lot of storytelling in other media, like books about what happened in that era in the Star Wars universe. But this is the first series that takes place in that time period.
Did you sort of create this soundscape, what it was going to sound like before you started writing themes for, ideas or characters?
The test is whether it goes with picture. And I mean, well, no, I'm skipping over a step. There is one part of it that I did create beforehand. But it was because it was on-camera music, and on-camera music has to exist before they shoot it. And whereas most of the music for anything we see happens in post-production after it's already shot. But the music that came before was the music for the Ascension ceremony, which we see in episode 3, when Osha and May, as young children, are supposed to take part in this ceremony that is kind of a coming of age in their culture. It's an incantation, it's a chant. And so it's performed all with female vocals because it's an all-female society. So I had great fun writing this piece and using a chorus of wonderful vocalists from many different cultures, so that it would sound as multicultural as the witches look when you see them, when they're doing this ceremony. So that was first, and then they did that on camera. And then I, months later came back and started doing the rest of the themes and sounds of the score.
Did you get to actually be there on set when this was performed?
Well, so I told them that I thought it was just crucial that I be there to make sure that all the music came off well, and they seemed to believe this line of reasoning. And so I did get to go and be on set of Star Wars and completely geek out. What I didn't know was that it was going to be early January in the UK and a night shoot, and it was completely frigid. And so my body was not happy during this experience, but my soul was completely satisfied. So.
I think that's great. And also, I particularly loved that incantation sequence, and because it's choral, and I didn't really understand what they were singing, what the lyrics were, but I knew that you would write something that was totally appropriate theme-wise.
No, thanks. The lyrics are the power of one, the power of two, the power of many, which is directly from the script, and that's what they intone during this ceremony. And then in the background, there's a lot of different vocalizations that are non-specific and designed to give it the feeling of a sacred ceremony. So there's a lot of other non-lyrical vocalization in the background of that.
So let's talk about the dramatic score, which is just as interesting to me. Did you, and it's, of course, the story itself, which involves twins who are separated at a young age and then wind up on sort of different sides of the force, I guess, if you will. Did you feel that you needed to write themes for characters or for ideas, or maybe even for different planets?
Yeah, so I'm a person who relates to themes or motifs as coming from they're like literary motifs. Literary motifs are about ideas more than about a singular person. I mean, if I was going to have a theme that represented me, I would feel like that was pretty limiting to who I am as a person and as my different emotions and things that I'm about, right? So to me, the themes are about a literary theme, or about an emotion or a belief. So I would write them not so much based on who was on the screen, but who or what emotion or idea that person represented. And of course, in a story, people are about certain things. And so, of course, those themes occur over, those characters. So you hear, for example, over May, she's on a mission, and she's on a vendetta, and she is trying to fight without weapons, she does a lot of martial arts type fighting. And so her music's very percussion driven, and that was that was a way of giving her a theme, but it's because of what she represents. There's a theme that's kind of that you hear a lot over soul, and the reason you do, it's an aspiration. It's an aspirational theme of the Force, of the good side of the Force, of the Jedi, and aspiring to become a Jedi, aspiring to do the right thing. And there are other themes. Osha has a theme that's very actually. She has a couple themes or things that go over her, but one of them is a very soft and gentle theme, because when we meet her, she's very vulnerable, and she's been essentially rejected from the Jedi, which was all she ever wanted to do. So you can tell how I was coming up with themes based on what was the emotions on screen at the moment. And then as those certain themes were working, then when that theme would go with someone else, it might show up in a different situation. And that was actually part of the fun of it.
I think it's great because in a very subtle way, it sort of deepens the storytelling.
Well, thank you. I think, music is storytelling. It's especially in media. It's a crucial part of that. And ultimately the test of the music is whether it tells the story. And there's also a theme of loss, and that happens. We first see it in the very first scene in the noodle shop where a Jedi is killed. When I saw that as a fan and knew that was in the first scene, I was just like, oh no, are we really doing this? But there needed to be a theme that just reflected what a tragedy that is. And so that theme recurs throughout the series in moments of really deep and serious loss.
Yeah. And there's a lot of sadness that runs throughout this thing. And so it became a very useful theme, I suspect.
It did.
You mentioned martial arts, which I think is another interesting element here, because I thought as I was listening throughout the series that there were Asian influences from time to time, not just in what we were hearing, but maybe in the style of music. Am I correct in that? Or am I even close?
Well, yeah, there's a huge use of taiko drums, which are a Japanese instrument. But and so there's an Asian influence there, but it's not meant to be as culturally specific as it might in a piece that took place in in an Asian country. It's meant to evoke what we think of in our more general society as going with this very physical, hand-to-hand sort of combat style. I'm not an expert in Asian music or how it's constructed. I'm really just using the sound of the instruments to evoke a certain feeling. And when you write with percussion, you know, obviously you're not relying on harmony as you might if you were writing music that's based in harmony and other instruments. So the rhythm is the thing, and the interplay of rhythm is the thing. And I don't feel like the way I have the rhythms interplay is particularly Asian. It has to do more with the, I'm looking at the unbelievable athletic energy of the actors when they do these scenes. And I want to make sure that the music conveys the emotion that one would have if one was flying through the air as they do, or if they were possessed with the emotion that they have when they're trying to kill each other. So that's where the inspiration of that comes from.
And also earlier we were talking about multiculturalism, particularly in terms of the voices. And I'm wondering if that's also true in terms of the instruments that we're hearing throughout the score. Are there unusual instruments, or does that go to your earlier point about virtual instruments?
Yeah, that's the thing with virtual instruments. It's a way of taking a world that's essentially orchestral. And I mean, even taiko drums are used so much in media music that they might be considered orchestral instruments at this point. But the virtual instruments allow us to take this what's a traditional sound to the ear, and then expand it out into some worlds that feel like, oh, we haven't seen this before. And yet I understand the emotion that's going on in this situation, even though what I'm seeing may be, you know, new to my eyes.
In terms of process, were you working episode by episode through the 8, or did you have the assignment early enough that you could sort of plan an arc for the entire score?
In the micro, it was episode by episode. I mean, it was great to know what the whole story was, but I didn't know. You know, it's one thing if you read on the page, this is what happens, and another when you see it, you're like, oh, you know, this thing I read, this is a really big deal. And you don't get that until you see it. Sometimes there's certain things that you can miss on the page. So I had fun watching it and having a genuine, you know, fan reaction to things. And because that, I think my reaction was a really authentic place to begin to work on the music. And I would always check in with Leslye and the producers about, you know, something that I interpreted one way that maybe was meant to go another way. And we would have these great discussions about the characters' motivations, and especially in this series where people's motives are mixed in a lot of situations, or the situations are complex. And so it was really great to have these discussions with them after it was already shot, but I was a fan and having reactions and wanting to know how the music could enhance the story that's supposed to be there. Anyway, that part was great. But then when things, you know, the first episode always takes the longest because you're essentially starting from scratch. But then when things start to work, then you begin to go, aha, this would be good if this was over here, you know, in episode 6 or something much later. Or you realize, oh, this scene, you know, the very end of episode 1, for example, is this kind of a tease of what's gonna come, but not even for a while. And so when that scene came together, that scene was added later than some of the rest of episode 1. But I had already seen some of the later episode to know, oh, this is a great place to foreshadow that. and that turned out to work really well. So you kind of jump in and you figure out things that are working, and then you look at how you might set those up to help them recur, to create the illusion that you knew the whole thing before you ever started. But of course, that's, that's the goal, but that's never how it works.
So were you able to plant any sort of musical seeds or hints to us that might pay off later on?
For sure. There are themes that recur, and the themes get to come together in a way that I think, to me as a musician, is very satisfying by episode 8. I think the joy of music is listening for that and being able to identify, oh, and now these things are, this was always part of that, but I never knew that before.
I just love your use of percussion through this. And we were talking about taiko drums, but it seems to me there's a lot of different percussion in this score. And I wonder if this was all done live or if these were things you might have been able to realize in your studio.
It's absolutely 50-50. It's great to be able to have in the studio, access to every percussive sound you could imagine. And to be able to just creatively say, oh, I feel like this goes together. And so it does, but then a lot of times you can play those sounds live and you can get not only just this incredibly dynamic recording, but you can get the human element in the music that me and my team may not be able to do like a professional player. And then there are some sounds that are that live in this virtual world, and they just have a kind of vibe to them. And it's hard to express what's working, but then you replace them and you're like, oh no, I liked the way it was originally. So I just felt free to make a choice of this one's live and this one's virtual, and they're all blended together to in a way that just feels intuitively right.
So you recorded the orchestra in Vienna, I believe. Is that right?
Yep.
And were you able to go and actually be there during the recording, or were you able to at least monitor it from here?
We had 4 blocks, and I was there for 3 of the 4 recording sessions. I didn't go to one of them because of the reason you said, because I was trying to make sure I could be there for the next one, or that there'd be music for the next one. And it's so wonderful to be at the session when you can be. I mean, it's both. It's only recently that we're able to actually dial in to a session and not have to travel. And there are times when that's a huge advantage, like when you're under a deadline for something that's coming up. At the same time, there's nothing like being there. And I loved my time there and working with the musicians at Synchron Stage. They're extraordinary, and Vienna is beautiful, and I saw almost none of it as I went to and from the studio. But nonetheless.
And how big was your orchestra there?
70 some.
And was the choir also recorded there, or were some of the voices recorded here? I looked at the musicians list and I thought I recognized some of the names of the singers.
Yes. So the initial vocal session was done here in LA, and that was the one before, for the on-camera music. But then I went and then there's a choir. They're not in for some of the biggest music of some of the episodes. There's a choir, and that's a choir in Vienna as well. But I sampled the music from the Ascension ceremony, and it ended up being used because it's reference to, their understanding what happened to the twins in the past is one of the most important plot lines of the whole show. So there's a lot of alluding to what happened in the past and what is separating the twins. And so in a lot of episodes, the original sound of the witches doing their incantation comes back. So that's why you see the local singers in the credits so much, because they are making guest appearances via the sample.
That's great. I love this show because it's a slowly unfolding mystery with a constant series of surprises that you really don't see coming.
Great.
And I wonder if that was part of the fun for you. Who is this Dark Lord? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I totally watched every episode as a fan before tackling the music for it. And I got to have the experiences that people are having now watching it completed. I got to have all those experiences last year with no effects and some temp score and all the things the way we get them when we see them.
Another element that I liked was the fact that and this is something that you don't hear very often anymore in symphonic scores, is that there are solo violin moments from time to time. And I thought that was particularly interesting given the fact that the lead actress is herself a violinist.
And I didn't know that the entire time. And I've had, I mean, I have a lot of, I have had a lifetime love affair with solo strings because they tend to show up in a lot of things I've done, both for media projects and for concert projects. I had no idea that Amandla was a violinist. And when I saw the video of her, it was like a day or two before the premiere of the entire series. And I thought, okay, how did I not know this? But how fitting, you know? so, so I felt really great about the fact that over some of her key scenes, they mostly happen in later episodes, but in some of her most key scenes where she's really being introspective and kind of confronting her own feeling about who she is, you hear solo violin. And so Amandla's violin really is Amandla's violin. So we, at the premiere, we made we made a verbal agreement that she would play all the future solos should there be any future seasons. and once my people talk to her people, we'll see how likely that is. But there's at least an intention there on both our parts, so we'll make it happen.
Yeah, I think that's great. So what about the final episode? Were you able to wrap up the story in a musically satisfying way?
Absolutely. Yeah. It was great to have earned the trust of Leslye and the producers to be able to really show how, you want, if when something's a standalone piece of music, you want all of the themes, you want the musical material to end up in a place where just listening to the music, you think, oh yeah, this is where we were always meant to be. Now that I hear it, I understand that. And I feel like this is a project where there was opportunity for that in the story, because that's the first thing. But also then Leslye and the producers were very much on board with when I would submit cues that did that, they could hear that that's what was going on. And they also thought that those were good choices. So I feel like the final episode is a summary of the story, and musically it's a summary, and that just feels really satisfying as an artist.
How long were you on the project all told?
The date, I remember that the date I was on set was in early January, and then one of our final sessions was also in early January, but of the next year. So it was in some ways it wasn't exactly a year, but there was, from the day I was on set, I mean, there was months after that when I didn't work on it. I didn't really start again until the summer. So
There's a great deal of music here. And I'm wondering if this is one of the largest scale projects that you've ever attempted in terms of media music.
Oh, for sure, for sure. It's a lot of music, and um, it was a huge undertaking, and I'm lucky to have a team that I work with, and that would have, I don't know that I would have done this if I was not in that situation. In fact, I couldn't have done it, and just with terms of the amount of music that was required and the timeline and everything, because a lot of what you do when you're doing a project like this is you're managing how it's going to go, and that's a huge part of figuring out, like, for example, like one thing I figured out was somewhere in the middle of it, I figured out that there's a couple episodes we needed to record out of order, out of numeric sequence. And I had to get far enough into the project to realize which ones they were. And you have to make that work in terms of both the timing of everything, because they're still going to be mixed in order. The final sound mix is still going to be in order. But if I say, but we're going to record episode 5 with episode 8, and then we're going to do 4 and 6, if you say that, you have to prove that it works both for the timing of everybody else and for the budget. And so fortunately, I was able to make that proposal and have it approved. But to get there to where you can make that proposal and explain how it's going to work for the whole thing that's kind of a project in itself. And it's odd to think of oneself as a composer and yet taking on these very much production challenges that are sometimes necessary. But that was part of what it was to bring this project in successfully.
And I'd be remiss, I think, if I didn't ask you about The Power of Two, that song that Victoria Monet has recorded.
From the very beginning, the producers, Rain Roberts, said, we'd really like to have there be an original song, and we're looking at who might be, a suitable artist for that. And what do you think about that? I'm like, great, that sounds amazing. And I didn't realize that hadn't been done in a Star Wars project before. But in the meantime, I had a huge amount of music to write, and I just trusted that would happen. And I didn't have to worry that would happen. Well, I didn't hear anything about it until we were almost done. And then she said, hey, remember how we wanted to do an original song? We're talking to Victoria Monet, and she sent me a couple of her tracks and D-Mile. And I was an instant fan of them. And then this was right before Victoria went on to win her 3 Grammys, including Best New Artist. And it was like, okay, then. So I just went to D-Mile studio, and I thought, if I was going to sample from the score, which tracks would I sample, So I brought him, those like 3 or 4 themes. I said, here's this music, and here's how it's used and kind of what it represents. And just, do whatever you want. And so it was great to see that he had picked this music from the Ascension scene, which is the very first music that I had worked on in the project. And a track that is so crucial to the whole story. And he had done this track based on that, and we all love that. And then Victoria screened the first 3 episodes, I think only, and then she wrote this incredible song from Osha's point of view that I just think that she completely nailed it. And I think that if she wanted to do more for writing for media, she could probably, because her song was exactly from the character's point of view, and yet it's also exactly a Victoria Monet song. So I don't think anybody had any notes, but it was like, oh, great, this works. Thank you very much. And then there's the single, and then I did in the series, it's the end title of episode 7. And so the end titles are a certain length, and so I did a little extension with strings that manages to make the song seem like it's exactly the length it's supposed to be, because that's what media composers do.
Yeah, that's right.
So I collaborated at the beginning and at the end, and then Victoria and D-Mile collaborated in the middle, and they were great to work with, and I just hope I get a chance to do it again.
Well, it's a thrilling score, and we're delighted that they chose you for this prestigious assignment.
Thank you.
So thank you, Michael Abels, for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
Many thanks to Michael Abels for joining us on the podcast today, and thanks to Jon for conducting yet another excellent interview. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Disney and Lucasfilm for helping put this conversation together. As I mentioned up top, Star Wars: The Acolyte is now streaming in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos on Disney+. Be sure you are subscribed to Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you will find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thanks for joining us.